When I got the Stone collection, one thing I was blissfully unaware of was just how time-consuming it was going to be to clean and test floppy disks. Now, over the past couple of years, I've tried a few things and I've come up with a process that seems to work fairly well. So today we'll take a look at how I clean disks. When I first saw the Stone collection, I noticed that there were a massive number of floppy disks. Even so, there turned out to be far more than I realized. There were original disks in boxes and bins, magazine disks, user group disks, users data disks, and box after box of copied floppies. So, I guess he never got the message.
Did I hear you right? Did I hear you saying that you're gonna make a copy of a game without paying? Come on, guys. I thought you knew better. Don't copy that floppy.
Back in the day, I hadn't got the message yet either, so why don't we cut him some slack? This one box alone contains about 1,000 floppy disks, which came out of the filing cabinet drawers in the Stone shop. They were subjected to extreme heat, moisture, and mold spores for over 20 years. Let me get this thing out of the way. Whew, speaking of weigh, that box weighs in at over 45 pounds or about 20 kilograms. I estimate that the Stone collection came with at least 10,000 discs, and I suspect that the total is closer to 20,000. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I clean discs. In the process of making the video, I'm going to clean over 100 discs. Obviously not going to show you every one of them. We're going to test them all, and then we'll take a look at the numbers. How many were recoverable? How many were not? How many that you could visually tell had problems could still be recovered? How many that looked great couldn't be? As you might expect, the conditions that old floppies were stored in has a huge impact on their survivability. Floppy disk longevity can indeed be affected by a number of conditions, including heat, cold, moisture, mold, dust, and even magnetism. There's a ton of conflicting information out there, but in my experience, the biggest impact is caused by moisture and mold, followed by dust and cold, especially cold where moisture was present. And personally, I don't believe that a dry heat, within reason, has a big impact on the life of a floppy disk. In fact, a lot of methods I see online for restoring floppy disks that are breaking down involves heat. And I'm finding that floppy disks that were stored in a dry, hot attic have great recovery rates. This vintage box of disks even states that they were tested to withstand 140 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 60 degrees Celsius, at least for warping. I've also seen some evidence that extreme cold, at least in the short term, doesn't have a huge impact on the life of a disk, because I got a bunch of disks that were shipped from Alaska and were inadvertently left on a loading dock outdoors in the winter time, including my prized copy of Ultima 4, and all of those disks have worked great without even needing to be cleaned. So the first thing you need to do before you start cleaning the disks is you need to do an inspection. There's several things that you need to look for. One of them is just the dust and mold we've talked about. You can set those aside to clean, but also you're going to find floppies that have physical damage to them. And you need to decide, is that floppy something you really need to save? Or is it something that you got 12 other copies of or is easily available off the internet? You know, if it's something that is unobtainium, that's rare, that you know, your own personal disc from back in the day, like my DDM disc, if it's something like that, you're going to go to great lengths to try to recover it. But if it's just the 12th copy of some cheap game, you know, is it really worth trying to save? So that's the first decision, because, you know, if you've got 10,000 floppy disks, you can't spend 3 days on each one. Several things that I've found, this Skate Rock disc has a physical dent in the disc, and you can hear it impacting the head and the drive. This disc will read, but I'm definitely not going to continue to use it. I believe it's going to be really hard on the drive heads. Then look for physical issues with the disc. Does the disc case have creases? Does it have damage to it? If this is a really valuable disc, you may need to remove the disc from the sleeve and put it into a donor sleeve. One thing that I've found is that you can frequently tell a disc is going to be bad or trouble just by looking at it. For instance, there's this one that has a lot of dust and mold on it. It's pretty obvious. But also, many discs that contaminate the drive head have this mottled look to it, and sometimes it's really hard to see and get in the right light, and I've had a real hard time getting pictures of it. Now, the discs with this uneven mottled look to them by far seem to be the worst to deal with. They're the ones that contaminate your disc heads. They're the ones where literally the rust is coming off the disc. It's no longer binding well. In some severe cases, just cleaning with alcohol and a Q-tip will take it completely off the disc, leaving you with this clear plastic. If a disc has this look, especially a lot of this look, then I don't think it's even worth trying to recover, because these are the ones that you're going to spend forever cleaning your disc heads, and it's going to possibly over time damage your drive. So again, you got to decide, is this disc worth it? I find that these mottled looking discs, which for the purpose of this video, they're all getting tested, and that's where we can tally them at the end. But my experience has been is that they're usually not worth trying to save unless there's something really special. My gold box discs are all like this, and none of them work. They're just terrible. Now, one big telltale sign that you're having a trouble with contaminated heads is you start to get a squealing noise. Yeah, isn't that like fingernails on a chalkboard? As soon as you hear that noise, get the disc out of the drive and get the head cleaner out. One thing I've been doing here is I keep a head cleaner handy. Just put some alcohol on it and run it in there. But also when the disc gets really bad, then I have the cover already loose on the drive, so I can take it off, clean the heads, and then just return the cover to the drive. So this drive is set up just for testing cleaned floppy disks. In my experience, the biggest tell on whether a disk is going to be recoverable or not has nothing to do with how it was stored. It has to do with the quality of the disk in the first place. For instance, I've found that 3M disks have a very high survival rate even when stored in bad conditions. It's definitely not 100%. Some of them are just too far gone. But I've gotten a lot of them. On the other hand, cheap generic discs like these are horrible. I often pick up a disc, feel how flimsy it is, and immediate know, oh, this is not going to go well. And of course, no discs are 100%, but I find that the original Commodore discs have a very high recovery rate. Commodore used decent discs? Go figure. So I want to take a look at these problem discs. So this one called Power Struggle has just massive mold on it. The mold is so bad it's hard to turn the disc. So we'll clean this and try it, but that's an example of an extreme disc with very little chance of success. So I have found a few discs like this Geos disc, and this one you can see is quite dirty, but it was also packed in with a bunch of discs in a container in such a way so there's actually creases in the disc itself. Not a good sign. Here's a more extreme example. I think this is in the same carrier as Geos. This was just packed in with too many discs, and it was up against the ribs of the case, and so it's just munged. To save this disc, if this was something that was worth saving, I would want to remove it from the sleeve. Now this happened on a lot of these discs. They were stored in such a moist condition that the reinforcement ring literally just came off. So again, you can see the disc itself has a fair amount of mold on it. And with that coming off, there is very little hope of saving this disc. Sprite Master for the Commodore 64. But again, reinforcement rings come off and the disc itself is very mottled. And that tends to be a sign, there we go. So that unevenness to the sheen of the disc is a sign that it's not going to be savable. Well, these are the discs I find that no matter how much I clean them, you put them in the drive and they immediately contaminate the heads. Just the actual rust is coming off the disc. This one's another example of extreme contamination. And this one would have to be removed from the sleeve to copy because the contamination, that mold is coming from the liner on the inside of it. Now, I've had a really high success rate with Commodore's discs. In this case though, this one, you can hear the disc actually crackles when you flex it and it's stuck inside the sleeve. This discoloration around the openings on the discs, I find that commonly on Commodore floppies. That doesn't seem to affect the ability to actually read these discs. This is an example of what happens if you use one of those discs that has the mottled look, and what happens is that that contamination gets on the drive heads and then starts to scratch the disc. An interesting example is I have a disc I call my scratch disc, which is just used for testing. This is a brand new bonus disc that works fine, and you can see that as I'm testing, if I'm having trouble doing reads and I've just cleaned the head, sometimes I'll use this disc to test. And I haven't done a full validation of this disc, but it still reads the directory. It's just an empty formatted disc, and it reads the directory just fine still. So this is how I just make sure that the drive is still functioning. When you got a bunch of dirty floppies that you need to clean, what I do is I use this 3D printed frame. I got this off of Thingiverse. I'll try to remember to link it in the description. And it basically prints in 3 parts. You've got the spindle here, which has a rubber band on it to give you more traction. You have the base. Then you have this A-frame part, which prints in place, but has a spinnable knob, which is kind of nifty. So this goes in here. The one thing I would really like with this, if I had 3D modeling skills, would be to extend the size of the 2 hinges over here, because they do have a tendency to come out on you. For the remainder of this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tape this down on the bench, because otherwise I'm always moving it around. Alright, so hopefully I don't regret taping this down using some 3M adhesive, but I wanted you to get a good stable view. I did some shooting of cleaning discs a while ago, and this thing was just like, when I looked at the footage, it was all over the place. So what you want to clean with is get a nice new microfiber towel. And I started out using the soft side, but actually I found that was leaving fuzz behind on the discs, so I'm using the less soft side. These are just Costco ones. And then I wrap it around my finger and dampen it with some 99% alcohol. Now what you do is this opens up, you put the disc in. I always start with the bottom side, and that's because on single-sided discs, that's actually the side where your data is stored. Put this on here, you have an arrow here, so as that rotates, you can see where you are on the disc. So then I rub back and forth as I work my way around. You want to make sure the disc is actually spinning. It doesn't always get perfect traction. Sometimes it just kind of is sitting there. Once I've gone around a couple of passes, then what I do is I hold the cleaner and I do a couple passes and just kind of move up. And once that's all done, then it's kind of a lot easier to get the discs out when it's not glued down, because you pop it through from the other side, but I will just use a pair of tweezers. Turn it over and repeat. Okay, so then the next step is you want to take the disc and set it aside, because of course you've got an alcohol inside. Most of these sleeves have a liner in them, and that liner can pick up the alcohol, so sometimes they take a little while to dry. If you turn the disc, as you can see, it's still wet. So I'll set that aside and I will clean a few more discs. I cleaned a bunch of discs. These discs have all been cleaned, mostly while watching TV with my wife in the evening. So then we have a variety of discs here we're going to test. Some really, really bad discs. These discs were just not kept in a happy condition, so I thought those would be interesting to try. I have very little hope for them. Bard's Tale 3. These, on the other hand, looked really good, but they were stored in a really bad area in the Stone collection. And some more Commodore and buried discs. So I'm going to have to test all those, and we'll do that in just a minute. So after an evening of cleaning discs in the house, this is what I came up with. So you can see that's a little bit more than you like to see on the surface of floppies. Interestingly, is these spots do not show up until the rag has dried. So as you're working, you don't notice that you're getting that much stuff off of the discs. And then when it dries, you just got these little spots everywhere. This disc here has been cleaned, but as you can see, it still leaves terrible contamination on the disc surface. That's because there's mold growing on the inside of the sleeve. So I thought we'd open this disc up and take a look at that. Since I want to see the entire inside of the sleeve, I'm going to slit it along here. Pretty much what I expected. So this is an actual floppy disk, and this disk's condition, I probably shouldn't handle it like that if I was ever going to try to recover it, but I would just clean this and then slit just the top of a donor disk sleeve and slide this in. I would think you could use this disk cleaner sleeve because it actually is made to replace the cleaning discs. But what we're really looking at is this. So you can see how nasty this is, and this has a lot of mold, little white spots of mold everywhere. All right, so it's time to start testing discs, and I've got plenty of them to test. By my count, it's about 102. And what I've done is I've made up a little sheet here. I can track each disc, what kind of condition it was in, what kind of testing results I get, any notes, and then I'll compile all that together at the end of the video just to see what the success rate is and to see what kind of precursors or things like that modeled look, what kind of results that leads to. So let's get testing. I started out with Dark Castle, a game I played back in the day, and I was very much hoping it would work, but alas, it did not, and we were off on the wrong foot. Next, I tested a stack of 12 original games, 11 of which were in folios, mostly from Electronic Arts. Of the 12 tested, 9 were bad, and I was sad. The copy of Bill Budge's Pinball Construction Set wouldn't read, but then I noticed the disc says Atari 400. These folios are all from the Stone collection, and they were in the corner of the shop that had the worst mold and a leak in the roof. I was feeling a bit discouraged, but then found that the Bard's Tale works fine. This was the first game I got on my Commodore 128. In fact, I purchased it in the same order as the machine itself. The copy of Lords of Conquest also booted. Finally, I was really excited to find a copy of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in a baggie, until I noticed that the copyright date in the manual was 1984. It worked just fine, so I got lost on a side quest. Next was a huge stack of assorted discs I pulled from random places. We'll go over the results shortly, but I thought I'd show a few of the successful tests. I was really happy to find a couple Lane County Commodore user group discs that work. These discs of the month, I've got tons of them, and they're almost all on really cheap, flimsy discs. I cleaned the heads with a cleaning disc at least 50 times until it became severely discolored around where the directory track on a disc would be, and in several instances I had to manually clean the heads multiple times to get the drive to read anything at all. In one case, it took me about 5 minutes of scrubbing the heads with a Q-tip and alcohol before it would read anything. I was beginning to think that the drive heads had failed. This process is really hard on the drive and the user, so consider carefully if this is something you want to do. Of course, these discs are from the Stone collection and they were in really bad situations. Finally, I got through all the discs and I could tally the results. Okay, let's take a look at the fruits of our labor, because I got to admit the results were a lot better than I expected. Not that they were perfect. A lot of the tested discs were stored in such extreme conditions that I thought we'd get a lot more bad ones than we actually did. Now, there's a few things you need to know. One is that some discs were so bad that I did not test them, and I know that's going to skew the results a little bit, but like this set of 6 CMD discs was horrible, and each one tested required me to clean the drive for like 5 minutes before I could get it to work again. So of the 6 discs, I tested 2, and the other 4, I'm just like, no, that's drive abuse. One thing you should know is that any disk that contaminated the drive heads was marked as bad, even if I could read a directory off of it. And that's because by the time you use that disk long enough to, say, archive it, it's going to contaminate the heads enough to prevent reading. So all told, I cleaned a little over 100 disks, and with the aforementioned bad ones removed, that got me back to my original target, which was a nice even 100. The discs were all cleaned first, and then before testing, each disc was visually inspected and rated on a scale of 0 to 4, with 0 meaning the disc looked, after cleaning, like it was brand new, and 4 being the modeling and the issues with the disc were severe and obvious. After inspecting all 100 discs, I found that 14 looked like new with a 0 rating. 30 had slight but hard to see modeling. 27 had moderate modeling but didn't look too bad. 20 had heavy modeling or other contamination. And finally, 9 had extreme examples. Of the 100 discs tested, we found that just under 50% were still good. This means that they sound good in a drive, that you can read a directory, and if it's a commercial software like a game or a word processor, it can be loaded to its initial boot screen. Now, it would have taken ages longer to validate every track and every sector of all the good discs. So it's certainly possible that some of them still have issues that would prevent them from being used. But they read a directory, they don't contaminate the disk heads, so they should be good to go. Now it gets really interesting when we look at the failure rate grouped by the visual inspection rating. Of the discs with a perfect visual appearance, 79% were still good. And the ones given a good rating of 1, 73% of them were still with us. Now of the questionable ones with a middle rating, we see a big drop off with only 41% still working. When we finally get into the poor ones, the survival rate plummets to 15%. And finally, the truly awful ones get an 11% survival rate, but that's due to a single disc that looks truly awful but seems to work just fine. I've tested hundreds of discs over the last year and haven't seen a single disc like this work until now, so the rating should probably be 0%. Yeah, I know, 0%. That bites. One more statistic that I found very interesting was that there was very little difference between the survival rates when comparing original discs to user discs, and with both having about a 50% survival rate. What I found interesting was that if you only look at Commodore branded discs, the survival rate is over 90%, something I'd noticed over the past year but was still surprised to see that it was this high. I think the original's performance is pulled up by Commodore, but also pulled down by budget brands like Mastertronic and Valueware. Those discs had very low survival rates and were flimsy. If you're wondering where I got all these discs, check out this video where I got the Stone collection for the first time. I hope you like this video, and thanks for coming.